Growing up, I always heard the rumors about the old house on Elm Street. People said that it was cursed and that anyone who entered it would never return. I always thought it was just a silly superstition until my friends and I decided to explore it for ourselves. It was a typical Saturday night in our small town, and my friends and I were looking for something to do. We had heard so much about the house on Elm Street and decided that it would be a fun adventure to explore it. We were all skeptical about the rumors, but we wanted to see for ourselves what was really inside. As we walked towards the house, a feeling of dread washed over me. The house looked old and abandoned, with broken windows and a door that was barely hanging on its hinges. We pushed the door open and walked into the dark, musty interior. The inside of the house was eerie and unsettling. It was like the air was thick with an unexplainable energy that was suffocating. The floorboards creaked with every step we took, and the walls were covered in peeling wallpaper that seemed to be from a different era. We explored the first floor of the house and found nothing out of the ordinary, just old furniture and cobwebs. However, as we climbed the stairs to the second floor, things took a turn for the worse. The air grew even thicker, and the temperature dropped drastically. We could see our breath as we breathed, and a sense of terror consumed us. The stairs creaked under our weight, and each step felt like it could be our last. As we reached the top of the stairs, we heard a sound coming from one of the rooms. It was a faint whisper that we couldn't quite make out. My friends and I slowly made our way towards the room, and as we got closer, the whispers grew louder. When we entered the room, we were met with a sight that we will never forget. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and in the center of the room was a circle of candles that had been recently extinguished. In the middle of the circle, there was a small, old book that seemed to be from another time. One of my friends reached for the book, and as soon as he touched it, we heard a loud scream coming from down the hall. We quickly left the room and ran down the stairs, but we didn't make it far before we realized that the door we had come in was no longer there. We were trapped inside the house, and the only way out was through the basement. We reluctantly made our way down the stairs, feeling like every step was leading us closer to our doom. The basement was pitch black, and we could barely see our hands in front of our faces. We stumbled around in the darkness, hoping to find a way out, but we soon realized that we were not alone. We heard strange noises coming from the darkness, and suddenly we were being attacked by an unseen force. We tried to fight it off, but it was too strong. One by one, my friends were dragged away into the darkness, leaving me alone in the basement. As I looked around, I saw a figure in the darkness, a shadowy figure that seemed to be watching me. I could feel its eyes on me, and I knew that I was not going to make it out alive. The last thing I remember was a cold breath on the back of my neck, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was outside the house, lying on the ground. I never saw my friends again, and I never went near the house on Elm Street again. Years later, as an adult, I found out the truth about the house. It had been owned by a man who was obsessed with the occult and had performed rituals inside the house. It was said that the spirits he summoned still haunt the house to this day, seeking revenge on anyone who enters. I often wonder what would have happened if we had never entered that house on that fateful night. Would my friends still be alive? Would we have uncovered the secrets of the house and put an end to the curse? But I guess we'll never know. All I know is that the house on Elm Street is not just a rumor, but a real and terrifying reality. I moved into an old apartment building in the heart of the city, excited for the new experience of living on my own. It was a large one-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor, with a view of the street below. The building itself was old and creaky, but it had character and charm that I loved. The first few weeks in the apartment were uneventful. I spent my time decorating and getting used to the new space. But one night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a faint whispering coming from the corner of my bedroom. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but the voice grew louder and more distinct. It was a deep, male voice that seemed to be coming from the corner of the room, but when I looked over, there was no one there. I tried to ignore it and went to sleep, but the voice persisted, keeping me up throughout the night. The next day, I tried to rationalize the experience as just my imagination. But that night, the voice returned, louder and more persistent than before. It seemed to be saying something, but I couldn't make out the words. The voice became a regular occurrence in my apartment, and it soon became clear that I was the only one who could hear it. I tried to explain it to my friends and family, but they all thought I was imagining things. It wasn't until I met my neighbor, Mrs. Jensen, that I found someone who believed me. Mrs. Jensen was an elderly woman who had lived in the building for over 30 years. She told me that there had been rumors about my apartment being haunted by a man who had died there many years ago. According to her, the man had been a recluse and had no family or friends to claim his body. His voice was said to still linger in the apartment, searching for someone to hear him. The more I learned about the man, the more the voice in my apartment seemed to make sense. It was like he was reaching out to me, trying to make contact with the living world. I began to feel a strange connection to the man, and I wanted to help him in any way I could. One night, as I was lying in bed, I heard the voice again. But this time, I could make out what it was saying. It was a plea for help, a desperate cry from a man who had been alone for far too long. I knew then that I had to do something to help him. I reached out to a local psychic, hoping that they could help me communicate with the man's spirit. The psychic agreed to meet with me and perform a seance in my apartment. During the seance, the psychic made contact with the man's spirit. He revealed that he had been a lonely man, with no one to turn to in his final days. He had died alone in the apartment, and his spirit had been trapped there ever since. Through the seance, I was able to help the man's spirit move on to the afterlife. The voice in my apartment went silent, and the feeling of sadness and loneliness that had haunted me for so long lifted. The experience changed me in a profound way. I had always been skeptical of the paranormal, but this encounter had opened my eyes to a world beyond our own. It taught me that there is more to life than what we can see and hear, and that sometimes the most important connections we make are with those we cannot see. Growing up, I always loved dolls. I collected them and spent hours playing with them, giving them names and personalities. But that all changed when I stumbled upon the dollmaker's shop in the middle of town. The dollmaker's shop was old and rundown, with faded signs in the window that advertised custom dolls and repairs. I had never seen it before, and curiosity got the better of me. I pushed open the door and walked inside. The shop was dark and musty, with shelves of old dolls lining the walls. In the center of the room stood a tall, thin man with a long white beard and piercing blue eyes. He introduced himself as the dollmaker and asked if I needed a new doll. I was excited at the prospect of a new addition to my collection, and I asked him to make me a custom doll. He agreed, and I left the shop, excited for my new creation. A few days later, the dollmaker delivered my new doll. It was perfect, with big blue eyes, long curly hair, and a frilly dress. I played with it for hours, but soon noticed that strange things began happening around the house. Every night, I would hear the sound of the doll's footsteps coming from the hallway, even though I knew it was impossible for it to move on its own. It would also appear in places where I didn't remember leaving it, as if it had a mind of its own. As time went on, the strange occurrences grew worse. The doll's eyes seemed to follow me wherever I went, and I would wake up in the middle of the night to find it staring at me from across the room. One day, I decided to go back to the dollmaker's shop to ask if he knew anything about the strange occurrences. But when I arrived, the shop was empty. There was no sign of the dollmaker, and the shelves were bare. It was as if he had never existed. As I turned to leave, a cold wind brushed past me, and I heard a whisper in my ear. It was the voice of the dollmaker, and he said, "You have been cursed. The doll you received is possessed, and it will never leave you alone." From that day on, the doll became more than just a toy. It was a constant presence in my life, always watching me and waiting for the right moment to strike. I tried to get rid of it, but it always found its way back to me. I soon realized that the dollmaker's curse had become my own. I was trapped, haunted by the doll's malevolent spirit, and there was no way out. Years went by, and I grew old and tired. I knew that my time was running out, and I made peace with the fact that the doll would always be with me. But on the day of my death, something strange happened. As I took my last breath, the doll began to move. It walked towards me, and as it reached me, it transformed into the dollmaker himself. He smiled, and then vanished into thin air. The curse was lifted, and I knew that I was finally free. But the memory of the dollmaker and his curse would haunt me for the rest of my days, a reminder that some things are better left alone.